Hi, I'm Sabrina Rice, your host here on a brand new show here on KBN Television. Here on Paradigm Shift, we will explore and challenge the way that you look at the U.S. and world events and dare you to face the truth. Each week we will be looking at a different topic, with this week being National Socialism. I hope that you will stay tuned because we have some interesting insights on what got it started, who is to blame, and maybe things that you didn't always think were true. So stay tuned, we're just moments away. Welcome back to the show Paradigm Shift. I'm your host Sabrina Rice. Joining me now is our star of the show, Ray McBerry. Ray, being a former Republican candidate for governor of Georgia and one of the leading spokesmen for states' rights and constitutional issues for nearly 2 decades now. Ray has also been seen on Fox News, CNN, HLN, and MSNBC, as well as hundreds of other television and radio shows. So we sure are happy to have you, Ray. So basically today we're going to be talking about National Socialism, but let me ask you first off, what is National Socialism?
Well, there are a lot of misunderstandings, Sabrina, about what National Socialism is and what it's not. I'm going to give you the Ray McBerry definition for National Socialism. I'm pretty sure you won't find this one in a textbook, but I think it's a good description.
Okay.
National Socialism is a form of socialism, but it's its own particular stripe. You know, socialism in general is Marxist. It's one of the Marxist philosophies. It's really the same as communism, but just a little bit different way of getting to the same goal. National Socialism is a specific kind of socialism that is the marriage of big government with big business, the two working together. And so it's the consolidation of power into the hands of a very small elite in any country. Those that are the big business owners run the major corporations, and those that are at the height of power of the central government. In our case, we'd call it the federal government. And so anyone that is in smaller business, why, they're the enemy of National Socialism, small family-owned businesses. Anyone who believes in power being held by the states and the local level instead of all of it being in the hands of the federal government, we would be the enemies of National Socialism. So the marriage of big government and big business, that's what National Socialism is.
Now, I know that, Nazis are often referred to as the opposite side of the political spectrum when it comes to communism. Do you find that to be true?
That's one of the paradigms that this show is all about. The paradigm or the way of looking at things that we've been taught is not really always the way that it is. And we've been told that on the political spectrum, on the far left end is communism, on the far right end is Nazis or National Socialism. The truth is, nothing could be further from the truth, because both socialism or communism and National Socialism are both on the same end of the spectrum. National Socialism is still socialism. And socialism, whether it's National Socialism or communism, still believes in the government controlling your liberties and the government controlling the means of production, the economy, business. The way the paradigm really should look is at one end you have total control by the government, at the other end you have total chaos, anarchy with no government control. What we as America started out with was an American republic founded upon law, upon the Constitution, which, by the way, was founded in America on the Bible and the legal system that we find in Scripture of right and wrong. So on the paradigm, we were in the middle. We didn't believe in total control by the government, but we didn't believe in total lawlessness and anarchy either. We believe that government has its place, but it's only supposed to do certain things as defined by law.
Okay.
Communism and National Socialism are both way over here on the end of the spectrum, and they believe that government should be in total control of your liberties and the economy and your business.
So it was the people still wanted a voice, but they didn't want complete control. Is that kind of opposite of what National Socialism is?
Well, people were told in Germany that National Socialism was the enemy of communism. The German people definitely didn't want anything to do with communism and Russia, who was their historical enemy, so they gravitated towards Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party because, in part, of the financial collapse of their economy that the Nazis helped to create, because Hitler and the Nazis came on the scene and said, listen, with all of this chaos and confusion, we can solve the problem for Germany. We will make Germany to be able to stand against Russia. We'll solve all the problems that Germany has. And so the people bought into the belief that National Socialism was better than communism, when in fact it's not a whole lot different at all.
Well, I heard you mention Hitler and the Nazi reign. What do you feel, can you give us a few examples of maybe historical events that took place during National Socialism?
Well, Hitler and the Nazis, as they took over Germany, of course, the people lost many of their liberties. One of the big things that happened there just before the fall of the German Republic and just before the Nazis seized control was that the German banks began printing money, paper money.
Right.
And the more paper money you print, the less it's worth, to the point that Germans were going to buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow load of paper money because it wouldn't buy anything anymore.
Right.
The hyperinflation destroyed their economy, collapsed their economy, to the point they were willing to accept anyone, even a tyrant, if he would fix the problem. So the economic collapse of Germany is one of the things that happened. You had the consolidation of all the banks into just a few big banks. You had the beginning of a police state where anyone who is an opponent of Germany, of the Nazis, were rounded up. Their First Amendment, what we would call their First Amendment rights of freedom of speech, was done away with, and ultimately they were arrested and imprisoned for speaking out against the government. Even today, we have some politicians saying that people who speak out against the government, maybe they need to be arrested.
Right.
We're heading down the same road.
Now, speaking of, Adolf Hitler, and I know I keep going back to him, but it's just because he was such a powerful man, in Nazi Germany. How did he get to that point? Where did he get his power from?
Well, that's a good question, because the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party really is tied to the United States also. National Socialism really began in Germany in the mid-1800s. There was an uprising of Marxists in Germany that were not communist, but they were what we would call National Socialist, still Marxist, still socialist. They were trying to basically overthrow the government in Germany. In 1848, they were kicked out of Germany by the German government, who saw them for what they were, kicked them out of the country. Some of them went to England, some went to France. Many of them came to these United States, and there, in that decade right after they came to these United States, was about the same time that Abraham Lincoln was coming to power in 1860. And in the Lincoln administration during the war, because those old Germans who had come over as the 48ers, who were National Socialists, because many of them had war experience fighting wars on the continent of Europe, Lincoln elevated them to officer status throughout the Union Army and gave them prominent positions both in business, government, and the military in these United States during the War of Northern Aggression, as I call it as a Southerner. They gained a foothold in America. And then over the next 50 years or so, as they gained influence here in America, when it came time for Hitler and the Nazis, who were trying to gain power in Germany in the early 1930s, it was actually Americans who supported National Socialism who funded the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party.
Wow.
Prescott Bush, grandfather Bush, he was George Bush the Elder's dad. He was one of the largest financial backers of Hitler and the Nazi Party from here in America. So National Socialism started in Germany, came to these United States under the Lincoln administration, and just before that. One of my friends is a co-author of a great book. Everybody ought to get it and read it. It's entitled Lincoln's Marxists and Red Republicans, or Red Republicans and Lincoln's Marxists, because it shows the influence of National Socialism in America and how it ended up funding it back in Germany. What a lot of people also don't know, and maybe we'll talk about that in another show, is that after World War II was over, the U.S. government brought thousands of ex-Nazis and Germans back to the United States and gave them positions of prominence. So National Socialism was funded by America to help it in Germany. Then we brought them all back over here to America. That's why we're in the situation we are today.
Welcome back to our show here on Paradigm Shift. I'm your host, Sabrina Rice. Today we're discussing National Socialism. And Ray, can you give us a little bit of insight about what life was like in Germany for during the time of National Socialism?
Yes, during that time when the Nazis were coming to power, they had intentionally caused the economic collapse of Germany through hyperinflation, the printing of too much paper money. We see that going on in America today too, by the way. The Federal Reserve printing more and more money, and the more paper money you print, the less it's worth, and it causes the destruction of the economy eventually. So the people were willing to accept anybody that could fix the problem, or at least claim they would fix the problem. That's how we ended up with a tyrant in Germany that was popularly elected by the people originally. Another lesson for America to watch. Not everybody that promises they can fix things can fix them. And so the economy was part of the problem, but you also had banks were consolidated into just a few banks that basically were controlling the country. In industry, you had a lot of small family-owned businesses that were put out of business as power was consolidated into the hands of a few mega corporations that really ran Germany. And those mega corporations, of course, were the ones that were getting the special privileges from the government. Those, of course, were the ones that were also making the big campaign donations to the Nazi Party. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot of that going on in America today, too. People having political control based upon their contributions to certain political parties or candidates. But as that began to happen, Germany eventually became more and more of a police state, where anyone that was guilty of speaking against something the government was doing was viewed both by the government and more by the media in Germany as the enemy of the state, to the point that people were not allowed to speak out against the government and eventually were arrested and imprisoned. And of course that led to the loss of other freedoms, including the right to keep and bear arms, because anybody who has a gun can always say no if the government comes to take away other liberties.
Absolutely.
So much of what happened in Germany, we see the footprint being laid in America today as well.
Well, and that being said, some of the recent events here in America, how would you compare or differ those from Nazi Germany?
Well, one of the biggest ones, I think, in recent years, at the end of the Bush administration and the beginning of the Obama administration, was the big bank bailout. Mm-hmm. That led to the destruction of, or the closure, the consolidation of all of our small local community banks, or many of them anyway. And now we have fewer banks, a smaller number. They're much larger banks, mm-hmm. and that's what the government wants under National Socialism, because if there are a fewer number of banks and they're real big banks, it's easier for the government to control them. And so power and wealth being concentrated into the hands of a smaller number of people. Another example would be the right to keep and bear arms, as I mentioned before.
Right. Of course. And how do you feel like that compares or relates to Nazi Germany?
Well, during the Nazis' rise to power, one of the things that they had on their agenda was to disarm the German people. Mm-hmm. in every country that's ever been taken over by any kind of Marxism, communism, or socialism, one of the things that they always have on their agenda is disarming the people. Although our politicians don't talk about it anymore, the reason that the Second Amendment was put into our Constitution is so that the people can stand up to the government if our government becomes tyrannical at some point. The Founding Fathers said that's why they were putting the Second Amendment. It's not so I can defend my home against somebody breaking in the middle of the night, although it helps in that situation. It's so I can defend my family's liberties against an out-of-control federal government trying to seize our liberties. So the Nazis began passing laws that originally said, well, you can keep your firearms, but you can only have certain kinds of firearms, specifically those that are used for sporting purposes like hunting. No assault rifles, no high-powered rifles, just those that you would use for hunting, shotguns, those kind of things. Well, that's what's happening in America today as well. We're being told that you don't need to have firearms that you could actually shoot people with, just something you'd use for duck hunting. That's okay. Well, then what happened as Germans had turned in all of their military-style rifles and weapons, all they were left with were sporting weapons. They were told you can keep your sporting weapons as long as you register them with the government, which means the government keeping a list of everybody that has a firearm and what kind they have, so that when they finally came around to confiscating them, they knew who had the weapons and where to go to find them. And that's what we have liberals in America today pushing for as well. It's so bad that those who are pushing for National Socialism in America today, Sabrina, have not even changed the script they were following in Nazi Germany. The exact same gun law that was passed as the Nuremberg gun law in Nazi Germany in 1936 is word for word the gun law that was passed by Congress in, I think, 1960 in the U.S. Gun Control Act. They didn't even change the wording. If you translate it from German to English, it's the exact word for word law that was passed in Nazi Germany. That's the agenda that those people have who are trying to push America towards National Socialism.
Wow, that's a big eye-opener, especially for many Americans.
It will be, and I challenge people to look it up and read the law for themselves and see it for themselves. All you have to do is Google it online.
Well, and isn't there a recent discussion about the fact that Americans are being searched without warrants? Is that a big topic, or can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, certainly we know that the NSA has been snooping into people's phone calls, text messages, emails for years, even though they said they weren't doing it. And now when WikiLeaks came out just a few years ago, and Eric Snowden, of course, he became public enemy number one by the federal government for divulging all of that. Really what it did is it blew the lid off the lies that the federal government had been saying, that no, we're not collecting surveillance information on citizens unless unless there's a warrant out for them. We have the right to search them. Well, we found that to be a total lie. That's what was happening in Nazi Germany as well, where the Gestapo was keeping records on anyone so that if a time came when they spoke out against the government, they could be targeted and arrested. And we see that potentially being set up in America as well.
So what is something that we can do to put a stop to this National Socialism that we see here in America today? I mean, it's pretty apparent. I mean, what are some of your views on that?
Well, going back to the name of our show, Paradigm Shift, we're being told that the NSA and the FBI and the CIA have to be collecting all this intelligence on us, law-abiding citizens, because of terrorism and terrorists. They're using that crisis situation to accomplish what they really want to accomplish, which is enslaving the American people.
Right.
And so understanding what the real motive is behind things going on in the news is key to us stopping it and returning America to our foundations.